Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Homes and Safe Communities, Wednesday, 5th of February, 2025 at 6 p.m. Before we start the meeting, I do need to go through some housekeeping with you. May I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they use the remote raise hand function? If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is
Chair, could you try coming back on requesting to speak again, please? Thank you.
Sorry, didn't realise. How far did we get?
Just as far as use the raise hand function to indicate you want to speak. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so thank you. I don't know what happened there. If a participant wishes to speak, can they use the remote raise hand function? If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to speak by the chair, please could they turn their camera on to indicate or place a message in the chat function. When invited to address by the chair, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this is not possible for any reason, please bring this to the attention of the chair and/or Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and/or to grab the attention of the chair or Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chair or Democratic Officer know. So please could I welcome all committee and non-committee elected members, our officers, and all those watching at home. Moving on to the agenda, we do have a request to bring item number 8 up the agenda to come before item number 4. This has been requested due to time constraints. Our committee happy for me to do so?
Happy, Chair.
I see no other dissensions. Okay, so agenda item 1 is is apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Yes, Chair, I've had 2 through to myself, one from Councillor Morgan and another from Vivian John, one of our tenant representatives. Thanks.
Thank you. Agenda item 2 are minutes of the previous meeting from the 8th of January. Are members happy to approve? And can I have a proposer and seconder? Councillor Hennessy?
I'll propose.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you both. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Do we have any? Councillor Aviott?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to declare an interest in agenda item 6. The tenant and leaseholders engagement is a personal, not prejudicial interest, and I'm a council tenant. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hennessy?
Wrong button. Exactly the same one, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we've gone through those, I will go straight to item number 8, as previously discussed. It is the Public Services Board project update, working with people who live in our communities that experience higher levels of deprivation. And this is Tom Bowering and Sarah Cutting.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Good evening, committee. Thank you very much for moving the agenda item for us this evening. I'm just going to give you a really quick introduction to the presentation and then hand over to my colleague Sarah, who's going to take you through a bit of a presentation to give you an update. But just by way of reminder in terms of this project, the Public Services Board in the Vale of Glamorgan published the Wellbeing Plan back in 2023. It set out a series of wellbeing objectives around creating a more resilient and greener Vale, a more active and healthier Vale, as well as a more equitable and connected Vale. And at the time of the Wellbeing Plan, Chair, the PSB also established 3 priority work streams. So one looking at responding to climate and nature emergencies, and another around becoming an age-friendly Vale. And then there's a third, which is around working with people who live in our communities that experience higher levels of deprivation. This report this evening gives you as a committee an update in terms of the work that's happened over the last 6 months on this important project. Sarah's done a huge amount of engagement work. We were at Ysgolgwaun and Nant this afternoon in the latest of a series of activities, and Sarah's going to give you a description of those now. We're bringing the report to your committee, Chair, because obviously it aligns really neatly with the remit of this scrutiny committee. We report the work of the Public Services Board through to Corporate Performance and Resources. I'm also really pleased that we've been able to bring updates to other scrutiny committees on the relevant topics that are in the Wellbeing Plan as well. So if it's okay with you, Chair, we've got a few slides that Sarah's going to use to just give you the update this evening.
That's fine by me.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chair. I think I've got a presentation that's going to be shared. Amazing. Great. So this is the Your Place project. I'm just going to run through a couple of slides explaining what we've been up to following our update, our initial update back in July. So the first thing to tell you about, sorry, next slide, please. I need to get used to saying that. Is that we've had a brand update just to make the Your Place have a bit more identity. So we've put it in line with the placemaking branding of the 4 towns in the Vale, so Cowbridge, Llantwit, Penarth and Barry. As you can see, the colours and the logos kind of relate back to the placemaking as a whole, but particularly to Barry. So that just gives it a bit more of an identity. So next slide, please. In this slide pack, I'm going to be talking about the engagement that we've been doing in the three most deprived areas in the Vale. Those are Gibbonsdown 2, Court 3 and Butchills 2, as identified in the Wales Index of Multiple Deprivation as being in the top 10% most deprived in Wales. The engagement reported here took place between August 23 and July 24, but we are continuing that engagement because we want to foster more honest relationships and dialogues from the community, and also things do change, so we want to make sure that we're keeping on top of that change and recording anything that's happening. But so far, similar themes are continuing. So the engagement that took place during that time, we held 43 sessions with the community and 24 sessions with professionals. In the community, that was in places such as veterans groups, community cafes, warm spaces, food banks, Slimming World. And with professionals, it was with people like heads of schools, PCSOs, faith leaders, etc. Some of those engagements have been repetitive, as I mentioned, and it's about fostering a more honest dialogue. Next slide, please. So for the rest of this pack, I'm going to go through the domains as they occur in the Wales Index of Multiple Deprivation. Some of those I've put together, such as employment and income, because there's an obvious relationship there, and others are separate, such as health, which stands alone. So for employment and income, all 3 areas are in the top 10% most deprived for both domains, with all 3 areas in ranks 1 to 4 most deprived for the Vale across most domains. Across both domains. We have the highest number of people in these areas in receipt of universal credit, with a majority of these not in employment, and there is significant income disparity. For example, Gibbonsdown MSOA is 27,000 versus the Vale medium of 34. Feedback from the community is that there is a lack of relevant employers in the direct area. Now, our industry with the most employment in these areas is human health and social care, followed by retail. Whereas if we look for a like area in Cardiff, so Ely Cairi, their biggest industry is retail. So there are a lack of relevant employers in the direct area. There are issues around transport to employment that's affordable and reliable. There is a lot of positive feedback around our employment initiatives and housing association employment initiatives. So that's really positive. There's also a low community morale and a culture of generational unemployment and poverty. Next slide, please. So for health, again, all three areas are in the top 10% most deprived in Wales, with Butchels 2 being the most deprived in the Vale, Gibbons Down 2 and Court 3 ranked 3 and 4 in the Vale alone. We have higher rates of limiting long-term illnesses, GP recorded chronic conditions and mental health issues versus the Welsh average. We also have higher rates of diabetes, smoking and cognitive disorders than the Welsh average. And as I mentioned in my last update, we have a higher premature death rate in all three areas than the Welsh average, but I think it's quite significant to talk about. So the death rate under age 75 per 100,000 in Buttrell's alone is 857 versus the Welsh average of 336. So it is significant. Gibbons Down and Court aren't quite as high as Buttrell's, but they are still double the Welsh average. So, you know, really significant numbers. So what are the community talking about? They don't talk a great deal about health, I'll be honest with you. They don't talk about being unhealthy, but the things that they do particularly talk about are neurodiversity, particularly around younger children, and navigating that journey towards assessment. They talk a lot about anxiety and mental health, which has an impact on the relationships that they have with healthcare professionals. And then professionals talk about the next two, but not the community themselves. They talk about poor dental hygiene, particularly from primary schools, this is. And there's also quite a lot of substance misuse with adults and parents, and that's around drug and alcohol. Next slide, please. So housing and access to services. I'm going to be bold and say this fares a little better than the other domains. So access to services, Gibbons Down 2 and Court 3 rank in the top 50% deprived in Wales, and Buttrell's 2 in the top 30 to 50% most deprived in Wales. For housing, Gibbons Down 2 is in the top 30 to 50% deprived in Wales, Court 3 and Buttrell's 2 in the top 50% deprived in Wales. So no one in the top 10%, and that's quite positive since these are services that the council have direct impact on. So things that people talk about, they talk quite positively about council services such as Communities for Work, COUT Plus, our libraries and our housing community engagement officers. They're viewed as really integral to the community. There are concerns around bus services where 30% of the people that talked about access to services said that they felt confusion about where to access timetables and reliability of bus services. And there were also concerns around fly tipping, particularly bulky waste fly tipping. Next slide, please. So moving on to education, another mixed bag here. So Gibbons Down 2 is in the top 10% most deprived in Wales and is the most deprived LSOA in the Vale. Court 3 and Buttrell's 2 are both in the top 20% most deprived in Wales. We have high percentages of residents with no qualifications as well. So things that people have spoken about, there are really positive views on primary school family engagers. Again, these are viewed as integral to the community and have really helped individual members of the community to get themselves out of a hole in some cases. There are some perceived concerns around Pencoitra High School. This is more reputational and based on the historical performance of the school. There has been improvements since the new management took over last year, but there is still a negative representation in the community, which I know Pencoitra High School are working on. They release a weekly video now, trying to promote the good work that they're doing. A lot of our schools in these areas also have quite low attendance rates, and there is some talk around youth crime, particularly in the high schools. Next slide, please. So community safety, again, a bit of a mixed bag. So Court 3 is in the top 20% most deprived in Wales, Gibbonsdown 2 in the top 30% most deprived in Wales, and Butchels 2 in the top 50% most deprived in Wales. However, professionals do suggest that there might be a lack of reporting in these areas because of poor relationships between the community and the police. According to South Wales Police reported crime types, the largest crime type in these areas is violence and sexual offences, at around 30% of crimes occurring in in Buttrells and Court, but accounting for about 50% in Gibbonsdown. The next crime type after that is shoplifting and public order. These are below 15% for all three areas. So it's a real significant amount of violence and sexual offences that are happening. So other things that people have spoken about, substance misuse across young people and adults, youth ASB, attitudes towards domestic violence, arson, and that's with particular relation to fly tipping and the Caldy Close bonfire. And there is a perceived lack of police presence. Now, just to explain on that a little bit more, that is around the community misunderstanding the powers of, not appreciating the powers of PCSOs. And that is something that the Police Crime Commissioner is looking to work more on. Next slide, please. So final domain, physical environment. So Court 3 is in the top 10% most deprived in Wales. Buttrells 2 and Gibbonsdown 2 are in the top 50% most deprived in Wales. So again, another mixed bag. So things that people talk about, fly tipping, as we've mentioned, largely bulky waste, poor road quality, parking issues, dissatisfaction with bin collections, dog fouling, but some real positive feedback on our parks, libraries, services and green spaces. There were a couple of other things that didn't fit quite neatly into domains that I just wanted to talk through. So a real asset in these communities, and all three the same, they speak really strongly about community spirit and family focus. They don't want to leave their area. They like their neighbours. They like where they live. They have strong support networks around them. And I think this is something we can really build on. There is a perceived lack of youth services directly within these areas. And from professionals, not from the community, there are concerns around male isolation, a lack of trust in services, and that's across not just council, so police and health board, for example, as well. And there are static community dynamics. People don't really want to move away from their areas, which has some negatives and positives to it. Next slide, please. So following on from the last update that we gave you, we've had a couple more significant outcomes and some that we're in progress and working on. So things that we've delivered since then. So we've worked with some of our primary schools to create parent support groups for neurodiversity. And this is offering a peer-to-peer support and information sharing really for small groups of parents. We've also been working with the Health Board's Neurodiversity Pathway Community Connectors to put them in contact with schools that are in need. So that's Oakfield and Halton Road specifically. Things that we are working on, not quite achieved yet, but we're getting there. So we're working with the Families First team and around changes to the index sign-up process. So they're also working with the Regional Partnership Board because following some of our engagement, it was becoming clear that many of our parents that are on the waiting list for assessment, for neurodiversity assessment, didn't know about the index. So we're looking at that process. We're working with the housing team and waste team around a fly tipping provision pilot in these areas. We're working with the health boards around their more community-based health and wellbeing hubs. We're working with the housing team to try and utilise our social housing flats notice boards better to promote our council services. We're working with Project Zero and Natural Resources Wales around better engagement with more deprived communities and updating the Vale Glamorgan Council website to use better language to engage with these communities. And we've also been working with the Reshaping Assets group around home view and what the future of that looks like. Next slide, please. So just a little map of where we are now. So as per our last update, we created our PSB steering group. We created a comprehensive engagement plan, and we went out and have been actively engaging with people. As the green line shows, I think it's very important to continue that active engagement throughout the rest of the project, just to keep up to date with what's happening and foster more honest dialogues. As Tom mentioned earlier on, today was the first of one of our focused workshops, and I'm going to talk about those in the next slide a bit more and talk about the next steps after that as well. So next slide, please. We're integrating all of this data into our placemaking and long-term towns for Barry plans. We're sharing information on the research that we've done. So we've presented to our SLT and to our councillors. We've encouraged our PSB partners to take the information back and share with their senior leadership teams. And we are waiting feedback on that for our next meeting. And as we've mentioned, we've delivered the first of one of a series of focused workshops today. The ones that we are focusing on first are health and employment, as we can make the most impact with those. They are in collaboration with new local consultants that work across the UK. And the purpose of those is to foster a dialogue between key stakeholders and professionals and communities so that the stakeholders can listen to communities better and better adapt their services to meet local needs. On the back of those workshops, we hope to create some really strong action plans and then deliver on the action plans. And as I've mentioned quite a few times, continue listening to our communities, which is the most important thing, I think. Next slide, please. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Tom, are you looking to come back in, or are you done now?
I think we're over to you, Chair and Committee, if you've got any questions for Sarah and myself. Thank you very much.
Just wanted to see if you wanted to add anything before we went up for questions. Does anybody have any questions or comments that they would like to raise? Councillor Aviott?
Thank you, Chair. It's not a question because I just want to compliment the whole team with this work, the fantastic pieces of work they're doing, and it's ongoing. And I think it's really nice to be working with a team who are so positive about getting good outcomes. And I think it's just onwards and upwards for this piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Aviott. Anybody else? Councillor Lloyd-Selby.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that information. Really, really great to see the progress that's being made. I'm interested in terms of the engagement, whether or not there have been any gaps in terms of, are we engaging with young people? I'm thinking of Butchell's too, where there's an older population. How is that engagement looking? Do you feel it's representative of the people living in those areas?
Thank you, Councillor. There are always going to be holes, for sure. As we've mentioned, I've tried my best. I've even been to a Slimming World meeting. I think in Butchell's in particular, we are definitely engaging in some of our older groups. We are definitely engaging in our families and our young people. I think, and we did mention this in the last councillor update that I delivered, I just haven't had time as yet, but I'm going into it in the next the next couple of weeks, is going to the residential homes in Butchell's 2 in particular. They are on my hit list. As I mentioned, we've been to businesses, we've been to faith groups, but as we realised in the last meeting, that is a bit that I'm missing. And of course, if anybody else has any other ideas of groups that I haven't or could have missed, I'd be really interested to have a conversation or just for it to be highlighted.
Thanks, Sarah.
Councillor Lovelock-Edwards, you are next, and Councillor Heather, I will call you in after.
Right, lovely.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Sarah. It's really useful to have this ongoing report. There's a couple of points that I just wanted to, I suppose, hone in on. You talk at section 1.4 about the priority work streams, and taking into consideration the key issue that were around community safety that popped up was around violence and sexual offences. And following on from the sort of the question that Councillor Lloyd Selby talked to you about in terms of gaps and young people in particular, is there any chance that the priority work stream could be expanded to encapsulate how we tackle violence and sexual offences? And I'm assuming, without stereotyping, that most of the sexual offences are where men are the perpetrators and women are the victims, because that's really important, how we can educate around that. I'm interested in section 2.18, where you talked about the next phase and obviously the workshops, and they're just starting to be rolled out. And I suppose my question is, again, what sort of, you talked about listening to the communities, but how do we ensure that people who attend these workshops or who participate feel that they are shaping the future agenda, and we're not simply inviting them to a workshop or a meeting and there's no follow-up? I just interested to know what follow-up there is in terms of someone participating, making the time and effort to attend a workshop or to give you their views. How can we be sure that we're feeding back in terms of getting it right, or even giving them the bad news that, sort of, we can't do this that you asked and these are the reasons why. So yeah, but thanks. It's really a really sort of encouraging report, and I'm really pleased that we're pushing in on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So there's 2 points you raised there, so I'm going to try and address them both. So where we talk about domestic violence, I agree with you, there's a lot more work that needs to be done there. Helen Moses and I had a meeting with the Safer Vale board 2 weeks ago, I think. And so on the back of that, we've got more meetings with the domestic violence team within Safer Vale. And we're also working quite closely with South Wales Police just to delve into those numbers a little bit more, because we need to understand where these numbers are coming from. Are these crimes happening in these areas? Where do the people live that where do the perpetrators live? So definitely agree there's a lot more work that needs to be done on that, and that's what the next, not only that, but this is what the next phase of the project is going to be, more sort of narrowing down, drilling down into certain topics. And then I really appreciate you highlighting there about follow-up and feedback to the community. I completely agree. I think it is vital that we do not let these communities down. They're coming to the workshops, they're being part of what is driven forward, and it would go against my being to just drop them. So the idea is not down in stone yet, and I'd be interested in a second to see if Tom's got anything to add. But I feel that they just need to be involved. It would be great to have some more community-led initiatives, so that they're part of it, they've got ownership of it. I don't know how we're going to feedback and follow up on this in the best way, but we absolutely need to find a way. I do agree with you. So, Tom, if you've got anything to add, that would be helpful.
Not a huge amount, because you've covered it, I think, Sarah, but really just to underline the importance of, firstly, as Councillor Ludwig-Edwards mentioned, that really important we involve the community in co-producing what needs to happen, and that they're in the driving seat for that. So that's definitely the reason and rationale behind involving our residents within those workshops. And I think from my perspective, this is just the beginning of now being able to move away from just looking at the numbers. We've had a huge amount of engagement, which has been really positive. And now it's about tangible actions, and that was what was really encouraging this afternoon to see, was that colleagues were coming up with ideas that have real potential. We now need to test and develop those further with residents in those areas to make sure that they are the right thing, and then they need to be delivered alongside those residents. But it was really encouraging this afternoon that people genuinely seemed up for working in a very different way that was focused more on those localities. So it's certainly something that we're going to be doing, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. Heather has been waiting to come in. If Heather can come in now, I'll then call on Councillor Payne. I can see Mike Ingram has his hand up. Mike, you wanted to speak on, add something to those answers?
Sorry, it was just an offer really in relation to the Vale SV work that was mentioned earlier.
Okay.
There is it's for information, there is a regional Vale SV strategy between ourselves and Cardiff. And I wondered whether it would be helpful, given the focus on this particular area that was highlighted in the report that you've had this evening. I'd be happy for a member of our community safety team who focuses on the response to violence against women and domestic abuse, whether it would be helpful for us to bring a report to committee, to a future committee, on the work that is going on. I think it's also to make members aware that we are in the process of drafting an annual delivery plan to cover all of the functions of the community safety partnership team. And again, there will be a report coming to this committee in due course with regard to that draft annual plan prior to submission to Cabinet and the PSB.
Okay, I would welcome a report coming to us, so thank you very much for that, Mike. We'll discuss that, the recommendations at the end, but Heather has been waiting to come in, so I will bring Heather in now, then Councillor Payne, then Councillor Hennessy. Heather, if you'd like to come in.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you and see you.
Right. My thing was, how do you get it out to the adults, the young adults? And we got a residence group. We can go that way, but would it be an advantage going to the sixth form school and things like that and putting it out there and offering it that way?
Thank you, Heather. Yes, as you mention it, currently our team are this week and last week and I think 2 weeks' time going out to the comprehensive school, secondary schools in Barry. So we've been to Whitmore, we've been to St Richard Gwyn High School this week. I think there's some confusion around Pencocha, but I think it's vital that we get to that school. And Bro Morgannwg, I think they went to last week as well. So we're waiting for the feedback on that. We've engaged with young people in different ways at events like Glastonbury and the Flying Start Family Fun Day. We also go to a lot of youth activities. We've been to some of our youth clubs with the youth team. But yes, I definitely agree with you with the sixth form. It's really good to get some of that feedback, particularly around the workshop that we had today around employment. It's really relevant there, and there's probably a bit more work that we could do on that, I think. Thank you.
We're not getting your audio, Chair. I'm not sure if there may be an issue with your audio at the moment.
I'm here. I'd accidentally muted myself.
Brilliant, thanks.
Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for the report. There's a few things on there. Obviously, Caddick adjoins Gibbonsdown and Court. So there is some crossover in terms of education as well. But I'm interested in the perception issue in terms of public perception and some of the issues that people are coming up in relation to what the reality is in terms of fear of crime, in terms of drug use. So, are those going to be cross-matched in terms of the issues that people are raising?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I mean, we are trying to take a look at what people are saying and sort of balancing that back against the data that we're able to see. And, that's not in a way to discount it at all, because as I mentioned earlier on, when we were looking through community safety, it wasn't in the top 10 most deprived in Wales, but there's a thought there that perhaps things aren't being reported so much. So we're looking into what those what those differences are between what people are saying versus what data we're seeing. But yeah, it's definitely something to consider. Tom, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that on that one.
It's a really good question, Councillor Payne, and I think it's the reason why, as Sarah was just describing, that it's been really important that we not only look at the data, but we listen to what people are saying in the communities. Yeah. Have that conversation as well with the professionals who are working in those areas, and almost triangulate those three things. But there's definitely work to do in terms of perception. And how we translate that into then the actions and the information that we're sharing back with the community, and also asking and keeping, as Sarah was saying in the presentation, keeping that conversation going so that we understand exactly what the feeling is within those particular areas. Because one of the things that's come through really strongly, I think, is that when people feel well informed, they understand what's happening, and then they are able to participate in those services. So but that triangulation piece is really critical for us.
Brilliant, thank you.
Councillor Hennessy.
Thank you for the report, Sarah. Excellent report. Two of my questions had already been answered, so I only have one left. You say in the report you interacted with veterans groups. Do you mind me asking what groups and when this was, please?
Yes, of course, Councillor. So the one that I had been going to, and I went there quite a few times because they made me a lovely bacon sandwich, was in Victoria Park Community Centre. So as far as I'm aware, that's the only one that was happening directly in the area. However, I am aware that since I think September, they shut down. So I went there about 4 times, I think. I have had some discussion with somebody that there is another one maybe in Barry Rugby Club, but I will be honest with you and say that I haven't investigated that since about November because I've been without a car. But I think that's certainly something that we need to look at is what's replacing that. I hope that helps.
Yeah, if David Dutch would actually pop his head on, he might be able to help you with that because I think he's a member of it.
Mr. Dutch, you're muted.
Is that better?
Yes, please be quick because we do have somebody waiting. So, yeah.
There is a long-standing group called the Barry Veterans Group, which your vice chair has actually visited, and we had a very, very good chat with her up there. So Belinda would be able to pass on more information to your committee.
Thank you. Belinda, would you be happy to pass that information on to Sarah?
Happy
Yes.
to, Chair, and they too offer bacon butties and once a month a full breakfast, so you'd be most welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes, if you'd like to come in.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I'll be quick. I've only got really a request, but firstly, a little comment. I sometimes worry about the rural Vale is excluded from data collection and things like this, and it does tend to often be a little bit town-centric, but that's just a comment. It's mainly about the information, the deprivation index information. I'm really requesting if that could be shared with the committee on a Vale-wise, because when you look at the Welsh Government one, there's a lot of information there. And also, I'm basically asking if I'm looking at the right one on the Welsh Government website. Is it the 2019 was the last time the data was collected? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Haynes. Absolutely. The index multiple deprivation, I think the 2019 is the most recent full data, albeit that we supplement that with more regular economic analysis on a monthly basis. So we can track certain data as soon as it becomes available, and absolutely no problem at all for us to send some Vale specific information out to your committee, Chair, if that would be useful, so you're able to see across those LSOAs. And just to provide Councillor Haynes with some reassurance, these areas are the top 3 most deprived within all of the Vale, which is why we're focusing the efforts on them. But I know that as part of the placemaking work, that yes, is starting with the towns, but is more will be more county-wide, that those issues are being picked up, and certainly we're looking to do some of the work in the more rural areas, and it was really useful the comments from the committee recently when we were talking about warm spaces, for example, and cost of living, to make sure that we retain that focus on those rural communities as well as the ones that are a bit more town-centric, as Councillor Haynes was describing. But we'll certainly get that information sent out to your committee, Chair.
Thank you, Tom. That would be much appreciated. Does anybody else have any comments or questions? I don't see any hands up. So in that case, I am going to recommendations. First, I would like to thank Sarah and Tom for bringing this to us. Sarah, it was very detailed and you've done a very good piece of work there. Thank you very, very much. Recommendation number 1 is that members note the work undertaken through this project to work with people who live in our communities, that experience higher levels of deprivation, and provide comments via the Director of Corporate Resources to the PSB. Are we happy to move that?
Happy to move.
Councillor Hennessy, yep. Councillor Payne, are you happy to second?
Yeah, I was happy to second and move it and put my hand up as well.
Okay, thank you. Right, recommendation number 2 is that members consider if they would like to receive further updates on the work of this project in addition to the progress reported as part of the PSB annual report, reported to the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee, and which is shared with all elected members. Could we have our committee happy with that? Sorry. Councillor Payne, you still on screen, or? Councillor Hennessy?
Yeah, I'll propose.
Okay, I will second. And I believe Mike mentioned a report, so I'm going to make that a third recommendation. Our committee happy to have Mike's team send out the updated Forstall reports.
Happy to propose.
Councillor Lovelock-Edwards? Councillor Lovelock-Edwards? Ah, there you are.
Sorry, Vice Chair, happy to second that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that is item number 8 done. We will go back now to the agenda, take the rest of the items in order. So the next item is the Cabinet reference from their meeting on the 16th of January. It's the initial budget 2025 to 26 and medium-term financial plan 25 to 26 to 29-30, proposals for consultation. Hiya, Matt.
Evening, everyone. I'm going to present this paper. I've got a couple of slides to take you through to help me do that. So I'm just going to share my screen a moment. If you bear with me. It worked when we tried it out at 5:30 this afternoon.
It's always the way, isn't it? There'll be a way around it. Don't worry, we'll get there somehow.
Hi, Matt. We're just
Liz?
trying to rectify this at our end. Are you sharing your screen now?
Yeah, I've got the green light on the share screen.
Thank you. We're just waiting for a notification at our end that we can authorise it, which doesn't seem to be appearing at the minute. If you just bear with us a second.
Technology can be a wonderful thing.
Matt, would it be easier at this point if we shared for you? Do you think?
Yeah, should I have one more go if I
Yeah, you're more than welcome
take
to.
the button off and put it back on a minute?
Okay, thanks.
So just pressed it again.
No, unfortunately, it's not registering for us to authorise that this end. So we'll put the slides up for you if that's okay.
Yeah,
and if you can just indicate when you want us to move along. Thanks.
Right, thank you. So we're presenting the budget for consultation to all 5 scrutiny meetings. I'm going to give an overall outline, and then I'll bring Mark Ingram to speak about a couple of committee-specific items on the cost pressures and the savings. Apologies to colleagues who are on a number of scrutiny committees. You'll be in receipt of this presentation on more than one occasion, potentially. Gemma Jones presented it to Learning Culture Monday night and Healthy Living and Social Care yesterday evening. I'm here this evening. Gemma will be back next week for Environment and Regen, and then I'll present to Corporate Performance and Resources on the 19th of February, and that committee will pull together all the comments from the scrutiny committees, including any they may have, and forward those on to Cabinet. So if you go on to the next slide, please. So on the budget, and I've got a couple of slides later when we get to the capital programme item as well. On the budget, I'm just going to highlight some areas of the report. So I'm not going to go through everything in there, but just highlight a couple of areas. So a bit of background, story of where we are, what the current overall position is. We'll go through the cost pressures and savings, as I've just mentioned. Have a look at reserves. So we've got a little bit more work to do. We've responded to the government consultation on what is the provisional settlement at the moment. I'll take you through what we've been saying to them, and then we'll get to the end of the presentation and I'll go through what we would hope that you could do following the presentation. So that's the broad outline of the next 5-10 minutes probably, perhaps a little bit longer. Next slide, please. And the next one as well. Thank you. So just I guess this is the story as far as we got to ahead of the publication of the budget for consultation at Cabinet on the 16th of January. It does feel a lengthy process. I am talking with colleagues how we can streamline it and have less time on it each year, but it does feel like a marathon at times. It's been quite an important year for us because the budget for 25-26 and the medium term financial plan taking us out to 29-30 is actually being developed alongside the new corporate plan, setting out the council's objectives and the reshaping programme, the look and feel of the organisation enabled to deliver that. So 3 key pieces of work working alongside one another. We had back in October the Chancellor's budget, and that was broadly good news, certainly for public sector. I would guess not so much for those on the receiving end of the increases in taxation. So very much pitched as a taxing budget to repair public services, as a consequence of the money that was put into primarily schools and social care. At a UK level, this £1.7 billion of consequentials flowing through to Wales. Around that time, we pulled together the medium-term plan, financial plan refresh that came to Cabinet in November. Of course, at that time, we didn't know how those consequentials were going to be divvied up across health and local government, and indeed how they were going to flow through to various councils. And at that time, we were reporting £34 million of underlying pressures, and we were faced with a funding gap of just short of 15 million. We had the Welsh Government settlement relatively early in December, and there were 2 components to it. It's a bit more complicated settlement than we've perhaps experienced in recent years. So there were a number of in-year allocations for pay, both teachers' pay and NJC pay, and also to cover a long-standing item on the revaluation of the teachers' pension fund. So some money to cover off employers' contributions for teachers' pensions. And then we had the second stage of the settlement, which was for 25-6, and on average across Wales, a settlement of 4.3%. Thank you. If we could have the next slide. So those transfers in were quite significant. Pay awards typically being around 5% compared to the 3% that the government put in the settlement last year. So some recompense for that. The teachers' pensions was quite significant, some £3.2 million, so taking up over half of that. And we did have some headroom in that because some of the homelessness grants were transferred into general grant, and those were grants that we'd not been relying on in our budget setting, so there was good news for us there. I suppose whilst the headline was the 4.3 across Wales, we didn't fare so well, and that's quite unusual. We've normally been in and around the average median numbers, but we had 3.3%. Nevertheless, that's £7.4 million, and was up quite a bit on the 1% that we'd been forecasting back in November. There was quite an unusual disparity this year. That the lowest receiving authority, Monmouthshire, was only at 2.3%, and then the top, Newport, at 5.6%. So it's quite unusual, really. The other key component of the settlement was the needs analysis that was driving those overall grant numbers, and against the 6 or 7 service blocks, all of the funding really being directed through schools, social care and fire. A number of the other blocks, and they're set out in detail in the body of the report, really minimal, next to nil in terms of increase. Council tax reduction scheme's an example of that. Minimal, no increase, yet as a council we're having to put an extra £1 million in that in the budget proposals at this stage. We had a number of other grants that were through, no real surprises for us there. On the revenue ones, on the capital there was good news. We've been assuming some reduction in capital funding, but that we've had an extra £620,000 there, so that was good news. Thank you. Next slide. This is just a bit of in there for a bit of context, both backward looking and actually perhaps giving an indication of some of our prospects going forward as well, given that there's talk of a 2 or 3 year spending review expected in the spring. So we've seen the UK economy relatively flat. That's quite a small scale on the left-hand side of the first chart. And going forward, and people will have seen the GDP figures coming through over the recent months. It's still flat, and there are some concerns around what that looks like going forward. And obviously that has an impact on the amount of funding the Chancellor has and how much can come our way in future grant settlements. And some of that is down to where we were with inflation. It's taken a long time to steady. It's back within the 2% target set by government for Treasury. It did pick up a little bit at the end of the year, but it's flattened back off. But there's a lot of talk about prospect for some further inflation in the new as we go through this calendar year. The drag then on the economy has been the bank rate that's been a little bit higher than we'd experienced for quite a number of years, and that's been slow in coming down. Expectation that we'll have a 0.25% reduction in the next meeting to the MPC this month, and with the prospect of a couple of other reductions before the end of the year as well. So that will certainly help the economy and hopefully our prospects for grant settlements going forward. So next slide, please. So the headlines and where we are today, and I've got this in bullets on this slide, and I'll take you through some of the numbers in the next one. So the overall gap is £8 million. The grant transfers in for 24/5 were covering off pay and pensions. We had that 3.3% increase in grant that I just mentioned. We're currently modelling council tax increase at 6.9%, and the numbers in the table that I'll go through in a moment are also up because there's growing population in the Vale, so our tax base is up, and there's a single person's discount review underway as well. Pressures are, we've accommodated pressures of £29 million in the budget, but the underlying pressure is almost £10 million of that. We've not been able to put that in the budget, and that does present a risk to us. Some elements of it were for investment, which are sort of minimal risk by not taking them forward in terms of financial overspend, but the remainder we'll need to manage as we go through the year. There's a savings programme of £9 million, so that's the £8 million gap plus some one-off savings from last year dropping out. That's a not inconsiderable savings programme. When you think the last couple of years we've had savings programmes in the order of about £7.5 million. We've generally had an approach to increase fees and charges by 3%. And whilst there's some content on reserves in the papers, those are under review, and we'll bring those back to you along with the draft budget, actually, which is going to be now early March. We've moved the date of the cabinet because of the timing of the final settlement. Next slide, please. So these are the numbers I've just alluded to in the last slide. So some quite significant changes here. The grant transfers in almost £7 million. The settlement is the 3.3% I've just mentioned. Council tax, an extra £8.5 million. We're continuing to unwind the use of the smoothing reserves. As you'll hopefully recall, in 23-4, we had some pressures around homelessness and energy costs in particular, which we were viewing as being transitory. So as a temporary measure, we've used reserves, and we've gradually weaned ourselves off that and unwinding those arrangements, and they'll come to a close at the end of 27/8. One of those relevant to this committee is around the homelessness, and that pressure is easing. So you'll see that when we come on to the cost pressures in the moment, we're taking some of the costs down, and actually the reliance on reserves here as well. Minimal investment in the budget, unfortunately. We're seeing demographic pressures across additional learning needs in our schools and across the social care population. The inflation figure is particularly high because that, as well as the normal pay awards, that has the £3.2 million of pension contribution increase for schools. High non-pay inflation as well, mainly around provider fees in social care. And other pressures, you'll know from the monitoring in year that we've run down balances a little bit more than planned, and we're needing to right size some of our budgets around social care, so that's a key component in there. Obviously, at the future years, we do have gaps at the present time, £8 million next year, and then in the order of about £6 million or so in future years. But that's all at the moment based on our current estimates of pressures, and also some modelling around grant settlements in future years of just 1% per annum. And we're currently modelling council tax at 3.9% in the future. So quite a bit of uncertainty in the future years. Thank you. If we could have the next slide, please. So I'm going to hand over to Mike Ingham very briefly at this stage, and I'll just talk you through this 2 lines of cost pressures relevant to this committee that he'll take you through. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. So the cost pressures that were put forward, and just to clarify, Matt mentioned reducing homelessness pressures. Homelessness pressures aren't reducing, it's the reduction is on the call for expensive bed and breakfast accommodation, and the work that the team have been doing over the last 12 months, which has resulted in us getting to a position where we will be able to withdraw from the hotel at the Holiday Inn at the end of this financial year. Matt mentioned the smoothing pressures. Clearly, post-COVID, most of the cost, or during COVID, most of the cost was borne by Welsh Government, and that funding has tapered off over the last couple of years to the point where the council was fully funding its temporary accommodation provision at the hotel, which clearly was unsustainable, you know, at a cost of around £2 million per annum. In terms of pay award, non-schools general pay, that's a relatively minor adjustment. And as I say, those were the pressures that the cost pressures that we've put forward, and Matt will on a later slide will indicate how we're meeting some of those.
Yeah, thank you. And we have, unfortunately, this is a bit similar to last year. We haven't been able to fully fund all the pay awards for the services. We've fully funded the schools pay awards in 25/6, but we're assuming a 3% pay award and only put 75% of the budget into that. So there is a built-in an efficiency, but the majority of the pay award is being funded. If we could have the next slide, please. So there is quite a change in the look and feel of the savings programme for 25/6 compared to the last couple of years, and that's been driven by the reshaping and transformation prospectus and the various programmes of work that have followed from that. We have been reliant in more recent years on tactical savings, and we're wanting to move to more sustainable position by transforming and changing the shape of the council to be able to live within the reduced resources that we have. What we're striving to do, and there is some populating of 26/7 at the moment, but what we're looking to bring back in the draft budget is a balanced position for the first 3 years of the plan. That will undoubtedly come from these bullets in the second half of the slide. So we're continuing to work through target operating model, service transformation, strength of communities, digital innovation and economic resilience, and working through broad programmes of work that will contribute to balancing the budget in those future years. So those potential savings won't be at the same level of detail and granularity as the savings that set out in the appendix to the report. They'll be broadly themes, and we'll be continuing to work through those in the forthcoming months, with a view that that we gradually bringing forward programmes of work from future years in the medium-term plan on a year-by-year basis, rather than seemingly starting a bit from scratch each year. So the next slide, and back over to Mike briefly with it.
So before committee are the proposed savings within the general fund housing. Just to reflect, general fund housing represents about, I believe it's about 1% of the council's overall budget position, and the savings that have been identified, partly a tactical, but partly a review of service. We've identified that the largest element of saving, the £103,000, is within our community safety function. Members will be aware that the uncertainty in community safety, and also was mentioned earlier around violence against women, much of that work is actually grant funded, whether that be from Welsh Government directly in the form of Vale SV grant, or in the case of antisocial behaviour and other community safety measures in the form of a grant from the Police and Crime Commissioner. We've had confirmation of funding from the Police and Crime Commissioner for the community safety elements that I mentioned, and we've also had indicative forward indication from Welsh Government regarding future funding for grant in relation to a lot of the general fund housing activities. Clearly, that will be confirmed or otherwise, I guess, in the next few weeks as the Welsh Government budget goes through its internal discussions. In terms of the second line, reduction in agency staffing, we took on a number of staff with the uncertainty around Welsh Government funding for homelessness. We took on a number of agency staff rather than look to employ permanent full-time Vale staff in the event that funding was withdrawn. I think Matt has mentioned that the NOLO funding is now core funding and comes through the RSG. And as a result of which, we are now in a position to be able to reduce the agency staffing budget by employing permanent internal staff, which has resulted in that small saving. The last proposal, members will be aware that we commissioned Havard Housing Association to provide our leased accommodation service. Havard last year indicated that they wished to withdraw from that arrangement. And as a result, we've brought the leased management back in-house, and as a result of which we've been able to reduce the management charge for that by bringing the service back in-house. And that reflects the 159k savings that are on the slide in front of you.
Thanks, Mike. So if we have the next slide, please. This is just another slide for context, and it's not surprising really when we look at where the balance of our pressures have been as a council, and also the balance of where the funding is driven from in terms of the settlement. And as I've put in the front of the Cabinet report as well, we're seeing the overall shift in the use of resources in our overall budget as well, where just 2 years ago, we were spending 68% on schools and social care. That's increased to 70 and on to 71%, given the demands and the pressures in those areas. So the overall budget is up. The net budget is up from 308.9 million up to 331, a 7.3% increase. But of that £22 million increase, certainly the lion's share on a net funding increase basis is with our schools at £8.9 million, again of which a significant amount was due to pensions, and then to social services with increased provider fees and client numbers, and also addressing the underlying pressures that we have in the budget. Within the others column, of course, we do have home to school transport. So that's provision that falls under the schools block for funding, and that's about £1.19 million additional that we've put in there. So I'm not going to go through all the figures in this slide, but I was just highlighting some of the key headlines from it. And of course, we'll share the whole slide deck with you after the meeting in any case. Okay, so if we could do the next slide, please. I've mentioned at the top of the presentation that there were some areas of work still to be done. Reserves is one of them, so that's a piece of work that is underway at the moment and will feed into the draft budget report to Cabinet now on the 6th of March, not the 27th of February. We have seen a reduction in reserves over the last couple of years, by and large on a planned basis, as we've set aside monies to support the capital programme, but certainly during the current financial year, some unplanned use of reserves, especially around social care. And we've also seen, in terms of our our ring-fenced reserves on the bottom of the chart, a reduction in school balances as well. So we're reviewing them, but we're keeping to our overall strategy that we've set out in the budget reports the last couple of years. There'll be a couple of reserves such as general fund that we need to hold for unknown and unquantifiable risks at this time, and that's normally held at about 3 to 5% of net expenditure as a rule of thumb. Insurance is a regulatory reserve. We self-insure, so we need to have a sort of quasi-actuarial assessed number for that. And then on in terms of risk and reshaping, we need to hold on to reserves to be able to support the reshaping programme. We have a corporate asset reserve, a general investment and reshaping reserve, a digital reserve, for example. And then the risk side, we have a pay reserve and legal reserve, the key ones. And then alongside that, we have our capital reserves. So that work's underway, and that'll come forward in the next budget report. Thank you. Next slide, please. I also mentioned that obviously the settlement we had is the provisional one. We're expecting the final settlement on Thursday, the 20th of this month, and we're expecting all the detailed tables at the same time the announcement is made that day. But we've taken the opportunity to respond to the provisional, and we have until the 24th of January to do that. As I said earlier, the overall settlement was good news. The 4.3% is, represents an extra £223 million. But we'd done a piece of work led by the WLGA through the Welsh Treasurers in the autumn, where we were highlighting across all 22 councils shortfall in budgets of £559 million, and that was even before the NI National Insurance contributions impact of the Chancellor's budget. So we are responding that the settlement is welcome, but there isn't sufficient in the settlement to meet everyone's needs. We're also not happy with the disparity in the settlement. That range of between 2.6 and 5.6 is really difficult to stomach, especially when you understand that all councils across Wales are very much experiencing the same level of pressures that we are. And we've put in a request that there's a floor put in, so no council receives less than 4.3%. We've also taken the opportunity to go back and challenge again on the formulas for social care in schools. The social care formula has been out of kilter for us since the introduction of the care cap, and that gap has just grown over time with subsequent settlements. And then on schools, the school formula really doesn't reflect need, especially around additional learning needs, where in the order of about 9% of the formula is allocated through free school meals as a proxy for that particular need. So we've put in quite a lengthy response this time round. Thank you. If you could do the next slide. So this evening, what we're just asking you for is your views on the overall pressure, the overall approach, the cost pressures and savings relative to this committee, and any other alternative ideas that you have, so that we can forward those on to Corporate Performance and Resources in a few weeks' time, so they can coordinate a response to Cabinet ahead of the draft budget going to Council on the 10th of March. That's all I was going to say by way of introduction. So we stop sharing slides, I guess, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Matt. Now, committee, as Matt has said, any comments or recommendations we make tonight will be sent back to Corporate Performance and Resources, ready to go to help with their report to go back to Cabinet. Do we have any comments or questions or recommendations? Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to put in my support for the challenging of the settlement. It's been, the Vale have historically had poor settlements, and as it's a percentage settlements, we go backwards every year. So I'd just like to basically put in my support for that, and thank Matt for pushing it forward.
Okay.
Councillor Hanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Matt, maybe you could advise me. I've got a question for neighbourhood services. Should that come to this committee now or to corporate performance next week?
I think that goes to environment and regen next week, or next Tuesday.
Okay, I'll do that then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Levick-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Matt. There's just a couple of comments really, and it's mostly stemming from the future projection then over the next 5 years, which includes the reshaping prospectus, and clearly mindful of the conversation we've just had with Sarah around community engagement. And the comment that you made in terms of it's, the budget setting and the negotiations now come out I suppose, almost like a marathon. I'm just conscious of the time or the lack of time or the perceived lack of time that we have as councillors to get the information out and to and to hear residents' views. So looking at that next phase where you're looking at the medium term plan and the reshaping prospectus, what key elements of community engagement are you going to deploy? Because you'll have seen how residents have responded recently to proposals, and that's something that I suppose concerns us all. We need to make sure that regardless of what our information goes out there, that we're putting it out. And I suppose I wanted to ask on that. And again, I think previously we've had the conversation about language and information and how we convey that information. Not everyone is an accountant. Not everyone is au fait with the fiscal matters. And it's just being mindful of how we use the language on things in terms of these documents, and getting out that information as early as possible. One point I wanted to hone in on is that I'm aware that 2.616, I think Councillor Haynes already referenced it, and that is in terms of the settlement and the continuing lobbying. And I just wanted to ask, I suppose, just to get a wider picture, is from the Welsh Local Government Association view, are most councils united in that approach, or are we a lone voice at this particular moment in time in terms of lobbying? And there were a couple of other points that I'll come back to them later if I may, Chair.
Yeah.
Okay.
So on the sorry,
yeah, I was going to say, do you want to respond to that, Matt?
Yeah. So on the transformation and reshaping, the work we're doing over the next few weeks will mean that we can set out some broad themes of work and how we're going to balance the budget in years 2 and 3 when we come forward with the draft budget proposals in early March. But what we will be doing with officers and the programme leads and the project leads for the various themes within the reshaping programme, we'll be having some extensive workshops and working through those proposals. And my expectation is that when we would normally bring a financial strategy to Cabinet in July, we'll have more of a medium-term refresh and some greater granularity around those elements in the budget. So trying to get us more on the front foot with our budget setting. What certainly I've tried to do, I might bring Tom in a moment to help me out on the consultation question. I think he's still around. Is not just relying on the specific budget consultation that we do when we launch the consultation on the budget and come to scrutiny and talk to other groups around the proposals, but drawing in on various work we've done around consulting with our residents on the services they expect us to be delivering and where their priorities are. And obviously that's the benefit of the work we've done this year, for example, on the corporate plan. We do, I think, for the importance of the budget, I'm keen that we get as many people responding to the specific finance consultation as well, and we do work to make that as accessible as possible, and we work with our comms colleagues to make sure that language that we're using is as non-technical and that we are avoiding jargon. And certainly this year we've a really big plus for me, and something I've been pushing hard for throughout the whole budget setting process, is that being in a position to actually publish all the equality impact saving assessments, any savings proposals that require one, at the time we go out to consultation, making it far more meaningful consultation. So those are all up on the consultation site. And so far we've probably, we've had just short of 500 responses to the consultation, which is a couple hundred more than last year. That's positive. There's a quiz on there as well to try and raise awareness of some of our key financial drivers. But I'll see if Tom wants to just say a bit more about the community engagement. Actually, before I bring him in, I might as well finish my bit and just talk about the settlement, the lobbying that we're doing. I think it's right that we lobby, but I think we can never actually rely on everything going our way. It unfortunately depends on all 22 councils supporting review of various elements of the formula. And when there's a limited or finite resources, there are always going to be winners and losers. But certainly, I'm hanging some of my optimism on the fact that they did change some elements of the housing formula this year. So they are open to making changes. But in that instance, they didn't have a data set that they previously relied on. So they're almost forced to look at that area of the overall formula. So I think we just need to keep lobbying and making our case. And sorry, Tom, I keep bringing you in and then not. But if you want to come in on those community engagement points, please.
No problem at all, Matt. And you've covered it largely. The only other thing I was going to add in response to Councillor Ludwig-Edwards' question is absolutely, it's really important we continue that conversation. So members will be aware that the budget and the corporate plan have both drawn on that Let's Talk About Life in the Vale survey that was run in 2023. That was a statistically representative sample of resident opinion across the Vale. Work is underway now to run that survey again later on in this calendar year. What's really useful as well is that the model that we've developed with Data Cymru, working with the WRJ, is being adopted now by a number of other local authorities in Wales. So whilst we'll be able to compare the results and understand what that survey is telling us later on this year in comparison with what happened in the 2023 version, we'll also be able to look at some of the trends across other local authorities in Wales. And I think that'll be a useful tool for us to have. And we're also continuing to build that organisational insight function. So where we are running different consultation engagement and involvement exercises, we're making sure that the results of those are shared more widely amongst colleagues. So elected members will be receiving the annual self-assessment report in the summer just before the recess. And what we're looking to do is strengthen the aspects within that of consultation feedback so that you're able to see that kind of holistic picture. And then the only other thing I was going to add, Matt, in terms of the language and accessibility of the consultation on the budget, is that this year the team have developed a series of different ways of getting those messages out and across, using Instagram for the first time, which I think is reaching a different type of audience in terms of opinions. And I know that you've been leading work with the communications team to make sure that there's more information sharing about the council's finances, as well as then asking about this specific budget proposal. So we're doing as much as we can to be accessible, transparent, and to get those messages out there.
Thank you both. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to come back on one point, and that is I'm correct in sort of what I heard is that the equality impact assessments are being shared as widely as the budget information themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all on the consultation site on the council's main website.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you. I can see Councillor Burnett is waiting, but I can also see Councillor Lloyd Selby wants to speak. So I will bring Councillor Lloyd Selby in first, and then I will ask committee if they wish for Councillor Burnett to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Matt, for taking us through that. Really good to hear about the lobbying that's being done, because obviously we would all share the concerns about, although there's been some good news in terms of settlement, there obviously the settlement creates pressures for us. I'm just wondering, is there a direct route for residents in terms of supporting that process?
That's a really good question. Let me go away and have a think about that, but it may be that residents could write directly to the ministers, but let me have a think about that and get back to you.
Thank you, Matt. I mean, it's really important that we're doing that, and that's really, really helpful. But obviously, the final settlement, as much as we're doing our best to protect the most vulnerable members of the Vale, as well as mending potholes, etc., it directly affects residents, and it just feels to me if there's anything that residents are able to do to support that process, I'm sure there will be many that will want to do it. So thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. That's a helpful point.
Okay. Do I have any other committee members who would like to speak? I see no hands up. Are committee happy for me in that case to bring in Councillor Burnett? No dissension. Go ahead, Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's worth saying that apart from the activities that the Vale has done on its own behalf, where we have, whether it be officers or cabinet, have discussed budget and the pressures with any cabinet member or cabinet secretary that they have contact with. We've worked in a coordinated manner with the Welsh Local Government Association, and in that capacity, I've represented the WLGA on two Senedd committees that were looking at the Welsh Government budget, as well as various other discussions with the WLGA executive, which is all the leaders of Wales, and there was a response that was agreed and sent back there, and I signed that off as presiding member. So there has been, whether that be at chief executive level, whether that be at section 151 officer level, whether that be at member level, there has been quite a cohesive framework of lobbying activities. And I think what, as Matt said, not everybody is experiencing exactly the same pressures, broadly the same. But there are things that sometimes the difference in the settlements this time are primarily on population growth. And I was late joining this meeting because I was in a meeting with other leaders, and the Newport leader said that in the past 2 years their population has gone up 20,000. So in effect, that is why they are at the top end of the funding settlement. But there are discussions about the funding formula and different aspects of it, and we are discussing how that could be tweaked, mindful that there will be winners and losers, as Matt said, in any of that, but also that the data that's being used on it is as accurate as possible. So we are moving forward collectively on that. But I do think we have to say, it's easy to sort of stamp our feet and say, but in the Vale, it's really difficult. We work cross-party actually, so we are working with councils of all political persuasions to get a fair deal for all, and that will continue. We do that collectively. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? Final chance? No. Okay. So I don't believe we've had any particular recommendations. Correct me if I'm wrong, Liz.
Correct, Chair. We haven't had anyone move a recommendation, so we can put the comments together, or the key comments together, to go back to CPR.
Yes, please. So as there have been no recommendations, then I suggest we put the key comments back to CPR. Are committee happy with that? Councillor Lovelock-Edwards. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards, you had your hand up. Oh, now I see you.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm a little tired and a little slow this evening. Yeah, I'm happy to propose that those recommendations.
Okay. Anybody else would like to second? Councillor Haynes, you had your hand up first.
I'll second, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. Don't go running away yet, though. We do have you for the next item, which is the Cabinet reference. Again, Draft Capital Programme Proposals 2025 to 26 to 2029 to 30. If you'd like to go ahead, thank you.
Yeah, I've got a couple of slides to introduce this as well, and probably rather than me trying to have another go myself, if Liz, you could share. Brilliant, thank you very much. So just 2 or 3 slides on the capital programme. So just going to give you an overview of the shape of the programme and its funding, and then how it specifically impacts on this committee. So we could move to the next slide, please. So the headlines are that there's been relatively little new resource for us to add in. You'll recall we did quite a major piece of work with the capital programme last year, where we were looking at future years and the schemes that were in there that we could perhaps bring forward or even put back a little bit to create some headroom. So there's very little flexibility for us this year. Nevertheless, as I said when I was talking about the overall settlement from government, we have had an increase of 620k from on the 2024-5 general capital funding. I think the thing then, though, is we nevertheless have a very ambitious 5-year programme, £82 million. And we'll know from recent experience that's quite a tough ask to deliver. That should be just in with one end, shouldn't it? And that programme then is just short of £400 million over the next 5 years, primarily funded through grant. There's also significant use of unsupported borrowing, and that in the main is for our housing development programme. I'll say a little bit more about that now, although we've actually approved that through the work we did on the HRA business plan, rent setting, etc. Earlier in the year, and those capital financing costs, of course, being met from tenants' rents. We did have a bit of a more streamlined approach to dealing with the capital bids this year because of the lack of headroom available, but they were shortlisted by the Strategic Insight Board in October, and the new schemes are proposed to be included within the capital programme. So it's just the headlines. If we just have a look at the overall shape of the programme in the next slide, please. So said £82 million in 25-6 and just short of 400 million over the 5 years. We do have a number of pipeline schemes in the programme, and those will be promoted once the outline business cases are agreed. But those are predominantly school-based schemes, so they're going to the learning and skills line. Within housing, I've got a detailed slide on that at the moment. There's quite an ambitious housing programme, both in terms of maintenance and improving the standard of the stock, but also about future development to meet the housing needs across the Vale. So that's all I was going to say on this slide. If we could do the next one, please. And then this is the main funding sources. So there's relatively small sums of general capital funding, just £7.6 million a year. And we've, based on the settlement that we've had for 25/6 and the indications we've had through the settlement, we've assumed the same level of resource in future years. We've modelled the capital receipts. There aren't a huge level of those. We're continuing to use reserves to support the capital programme. There's some unsupported borrowing. That's primarily to support the HRA business plan, but there is some unsupported borrowing around our schools in there as well. And then a major component of the funding is through grants and contributions, and those contributions mainly being Section 106 commitments. So that's the funding side of things. And then if we just have the one slide just setting out the main capital schemes relevant to this committee. So there aren't any bids that came through that process to be included in the 5-year capital programme that were in relation to this scrutiny committee, but I didn't want to leave that slide just like that because obviously we did early in the year at here and in Cabinet and Council agree quite a significant programme for their HRA business plan. So just for completeness here, I've just reset that out. So £25 million next year. Significant sums around internal external works on the estate. Works to the common parts, individual schemes, environmental improvements, and then quite a significant new build programme, and then also funding resources going into energy efficiency as well. So those are headlines from the capital programme. Go on to the next slide, please. I'd meant to put this slide at the end of revenue slides, but it applies equally to both. So as I said, we started scrutiny with the draft proposals, both revenue and capital, at the start of this week. The public consultation runs on to the 14th of February. And as I said earlier, we've had quite a good response to that so far. Within our budget setting, this Row for Governance and Audit, they review our draft Treasury strategy before that goes to Cabinet. So they'll be looking at that a couple of Mondays' time, and that we'll have a training session on Treasury management for members ahead of that as well. The Welsh Government settlement is relatively late in our budget setting process. That's the 20th of February. We originally aiming to get to Cabinet on the 27th, which would have meant us publishing our draft budget the day after we've had the settlement, and that felt a little bit of a push. So the Cabinet's been put back to the actual scheduled meeting on the 6th of March. We'll look at all three of our finance papers, and we'll also have the third quarter financial monitoring going there as well. So we'll take the draft budget capital programme Treasury strategy to that Cabinet, and then on the 10th of March we'll have that approved at Council. So that's all I was going to say for introducing the capital. Less content for this committee to consider than some of the other scrutiny committees, and in that the vast majority of the capital programme relevant to this committee has already been approved through the approval of the HRA business plan, and we'll just incorporate that into the Council's overall capital programme report and Treasury management strategy. So thank you. That's all I was going to say in introduction to this paper.
Thank you very much, Matt. Does anybody have any questions? I see no hands. Well, the recommendation on this is for noting. Are committee happy to go with that? And can I have a proposer and seconder, please? Councillor Payne?
Yeah, happy to second.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I suppose technically I did propose that, didn't I? So there we go. Okay, thank you very much, Matt, for being here tonight. Informative as always. Go and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll leave you now. Cheers.
Okay, bye. Right, so item number 6, report of the Director of Environment and Housing, tenant and leaseholder engagement strategy update. Mike, are you or Nick taking this? Nick, hello.
Hi, thank you, Chair. If I get in first, I can. This report is designed to give us a bit of an overview, really, of progress in respect of the tenant and leaseholder engagement strategy. I too have got some slides to give a little bit of structure to what I'm going to say. So hopefully Mark or Liz can make those available on the screen in a second. Awesome, thank you, guys. The first thing to say really is that the tenant and leaseholder engagement strategies have been in place since 2022 and comes to an end later this year. If you can flick onto the next slide, please. The good news is the bulk of the actions, 83% of the actions within the strategy have been completed. The remaining actions are either on target and in progress or not yet due, or they've been put on hold. So next slide, please. Just a reminder, really, by way of background for members, the vision for the tenant engagement strategy is set up there really to create a culture where we develop and maximise the opportunities for tenants and leaseholders to contribute towards creating tenants and leasehold-centred services, so really putting tenants and leaseholders at the heart of everything we do. So that was the vision. Next slide, please, which will set up the priority aims within the strategy that we've been working towards over the last few years. The setup there really to and unsurprisingly, I guess, to involve tenants in the creation of tenant-centred services. So that word again, tenant-centred, but also services that are meaningful to tenants as well. To invest in staff and also make the financial resources available to support that work, to support tenants to influence the housing services, but also the last one, to listen and value the feedback so that tenants feel their opinions count. Next slide, please. The key actions are set out in the report. There's quite a detailed, I think there's 56 of the actions in total, and there's quite a lot of detailed narrative regarding each individual action there. I'll just pick out a few for the purposes of this presentation and obviously come back to any detailed points when we get around to the questions. So firstly, the review and development of the tenant working group. That of course is the umbrella group which sits over the top of the tenants and residents associations. That has been developed, and there's been quite a big recruitment campaign with lots of new members coming on board, lots of new faces from lots of different backgrounds and also different parts of the Vale. There's younger tenants as well, giving us a real broader perspective, I feel. So over the last few years, the chair and the committee roles have also changed with new members coming on board, and I feel that the group has really sort of found its feet over the last sort of 2 years, really, and through the regular meetings and events that take place, have really been able to grasp several key issues, have some really meaningful discussions, and provide some really useful feedback regarding services, so influencing what's going to happen next. We've also relaunched back in December 24, I think it was, the tenant compact, or revised tenant compact. They're really formalising the relationship with tenants and setting out what the council's commitment is towards tenants as well. And that agreement was signed by the cabinet member at the time. Sitting beneath the tenant working group is a new group which we've established called the Service Quality Assessor Panel. That's a group of residents who have been able to take a deep dive into specific service areas and really get underneath the surface and have a look at what's going on. That group is involved a number of new tenants, mostly members of the working group as well, but a lot of work has gone into training and supporting and building the capacity of members on that group to be in a position where they feel confident to be able to look at different services that we provide. They've already looked at the gas servicing arrangements, the annual gas servicing arrangements, that is. So that was a really useful review, and that was a starter. They've also looked at the tenant handbook, tenant information communication that goes out as well. And I think there's a few more reviews in the pipeline for that group. In terms of an intelligence-led approach, clearly there's a lot to do and limited time to do that, and lots of tenants to kind of engage with. So what we've tried to do is use the data that we have to inform what we do. And a good example of that really is the targeted approach to recruitment for the tenant working group, because what we've done is profiled all the tenants, found out lots of information about them, their preferences, things that they might want to get involved with. So we've got quite a rich body of information about our tenants and their needs and their preferences, and we use that then to target services. So we've used that to target recruitment to the working group. We've also used that as a lead into our employability support work, where we've identified people who are not in work at the moment, who face barriers to employment possibly, and are looking to get back into work, and being able to sort of personalise and tailor services to suit people's need, rather than the more general communication that we send out asking for volunteers and people to get involved in different things. Over the last few years, there's been a concerted effort to improve the information and the communication that we have available for tenants. This was in direct result of the feedback that we got, really. We've improved the information on the website. So there's a lot more information on that website now about opportunities for people to get involved, etc., and also information about tenants' rights and various other things. So that was a good bit of work. We've relaunched the tenant newsletters. Recent newsletters just come out around Christmas time as well, with a new format and lots of different information in. And what was good about the newsletter as well is that tenants have taken a much more active role in the editorial side of that. So we've got a panel of tenants who will get together, first of all, to decide what type of articles and what sort of information they want to see in the newsletter. But when it progresses through to a draft stage, to actually review the articles, review the formats, the colours, the look and feel of the newsletter, and give us some feedback. So it's a real sort of good example of a sort of a co-production, working with tenants to actually improve the information that goes out there. And the other information, the other thing that we've done in terms of this specific action is about improving leaflets and information. So we've got some new leaflets about tenant, we used to call it tenant handbook. It's the occupation contract holders handbook now, and there's getting involved leaflet and some other correspondence as well. So some of the information that we were sharing before was quite dated and looked and felt quite old. So we've got some more modern information now in a standard format using the house style, which is hopefully a bit more attractive to tenants and mean that people will pay more attention to it. There's been quite a lot of training for both tenants and for staff over the last few years. We've worked very closely with TPAS, who are a representative group of tenants operating across Wales. And we've forged really good links to TPAS, where they've come in and provided training. There's been online training. Some of our tenants have gone to the TPAS conference up in Mid Wales and found that really valuable. So TPAS have helped us to ensure that tenants are fully up to speed and in a strong position in terms of both their knowledge and their skills. We've also rolled out the training regarding tenant engagement to staff as well, not just housing staff, but lots of frontline staff. So people across the team have a full appreciation of the benefits and the importance as well of tenant engagement and leaseholder engagement. and are well placed to sort of ensure that that feeds into their day-to-day job. So we're not reliant on one or two people's job being tenant engagement. It's everybody's role, and people hopefully across the service, all of they agree and understand that and demonstrate that through their day-to-day work. The other aspect of training I was going to mention was around the service quality assessors, really, where we put together a really detailed program of training for those guys, and we can use that for new volunteers coming on board in future as well. So a real sort of structured training program. So once people indicate that they want to get involved or start attending one of the groups, we can sort of run them through that program so they have that comprehensive package of support and information that they need. Finishing off then on the tenant feedback, we have got a You Said We Did sort of feedback coming out to being published hopefully shortly, and that'll come out to tenants. That sits alongside what we would call transactional surveys. So those are surveys of, what you're thinking about your last repair, were you satisfied with that, or how did you find that experience, etc. So transactional surveys are ongoing. The main survey that we do, members will remember, except because it comes to this committee in the report anyways, is what we call the STAR survey. So that's a survey of tenants and residents. That's a perception survey. We do that every 2 or 3 years, and that goes out to everybody. So thinking back to the last time we did the survey, there was an action plan of key issues, and we've worked through those and addressed a lot of the issues from that feedback. We're coming up to a point now where the next survey is due. We're in the stage of designing that survey, thinking about the type of questions that we want to ask, and again, the look and feel of the survey, etc. And you won't be surprised to hear that the tenants are part of that process as well, which is an extra demonstration, I guess, of the key role that tenants are playing in that survey. So we're hopeful that will be finalised shortly, and that will go out to all tenants then, probably the end of February into March, really. So by way of closing in terms of this information, really, as I mentioned right at the beginning, the tenant engagement and leasehold strategy is due to end later on this year. We're about to start the process of thinking about the next strategy and the priorities and the work that we would want to include in that. So there's quite a lot of work a lot of legwork that will need to take place over the next 9 months or so to build that up and to develop that, working with the tenants. And what we would expect to do is bring back a draft of the next strategy towards the end of this year for members of this committee to have some input and some sort of oversight and knowledge of that as well. So, lots of work has taken place, lots of progress has been made. We're in a stronger position now than we were back in 2022 when we started this strategy. But I think it'll be really great to sort of, having reflected on that, to build on that foundation now and really push us forward when we start to think about the next strategy to take us forward for the next 3 years. So next slide, please. I think that's probably the last, really. So I'll probably pause there, Chair, if that's okay, and field any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Nick. Do we have any questions or comments? Councillor Lloyd-Selby.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Nick, for taking us through that. Really good to see the progress that's been made. Really good to hear about, particularly the engagement with tenants. And you spoke about the fact that, the group has really come together and new people have joined. So given that the current strategy is coming to an end and a new strategy is being developed, what will happen for those tenants who are currently engaged? Is there an intention to continue to engage with them while the new strategy is being developed? Because it feels like it would be a shame to lose that engagement and lose those relationships.
Absolutely, Councillor Lloyd-Selby. Yeah, we'd want to absolutely sustain those tenants, and what we wouldn't want to do is to have a gap where we kind of stopped work, and then there was a period of time where nothing happened prior to a new strategy being created, because that in that time people have busy lives and would find other things to do, and it would be very difficult to bring them back. So yeah, the strategy, the work is ongoing. The working group meetings are continuous and will carry on taking place, and I doubt we'll be looking to move away from that model in future. The next strategies hopefully is, as I say, to layer and build on that progress and that good work, and think about possibly other more creative ways which we can continue to expand involvement, really, and get more people involved from different backgrounds, different experiences, and really sort of to shape that, really. Because I think one of the criticisms sometimes of tenant engagement across different organisations is that the pool of people who get involved is very small. They sometimes can be made up of a specific demographic, and therefore only have sort of not be representative of the broader tenant population, really. So, we're particularly pleased that our group is mixed, as I say, not just geographically, people from different areas, but also different ages, different backgrounds, different life experiences, and I think that sort of puts us in a much stronger position.
May I respond, Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, just very briefly say thank you. That's really good to hear, Nick. And Chair, I think this feels like a really excellent area of work, and I hope that as a committee we'll send our thanks back to all those who've been working so hard to support the tenants, as well as the tenants who've engaged around this really, really important strategy. Thank you.
Councillor Aviott.
Thank you, Chair. I was involved with tenant engagement right from the inception many, many years ago, and it was constantly evolving. But what I found when I was first on it, before I was actually working, I was on benefits at the time, bringing up 3 children. So at the time, it was a lot of elderly people who had more time, retired people, but it was constantly evolving, like I said. And we started getting young mums with completely different points of view, completely different problems, and they really contributed. But I think a lot of people drop off when they start, they have other obligations, going to work. The only thing I'd like to say as well is that it's a fantastic opportunity to kind of do training. They offer you lots of different things. It's not just like sticking up for council tenants. There's so many opportunities there, and you learn so much. That's all I want to say, and I think it's a fantastic thing, and I'm glad it's going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Councillor Ava, because it's the transferable skills some of the tenants are able to feed back that they've learned, and also the confidence, and also for some people who can be sort of isolated and not know people in the area or lack support network, that opportunity to meet with others and feel part of something. So there's lots and lots of different benefits, and I think it's our job to really highlight those and promote that, and sell it to people so that they can really benefit.
Thank you. Councillor Hanks.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, Nick. I was just wanting to ask you a little bit about the work with the community investment team. You're hoping to develop a Vale-wide young people forum. Is that still something you're hoping to start, and have you got an update on that, please?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Yeah, that is something. There isn't an update at the moment because there's a number of different pieces of work going on, but that isn't something that we've given up on. And if it's not done in time, that'll feed into the next strategy then, because conscious of the point just made it really that the demographic has always been older people, and we do want to hear the voice of the younger people. And whilst it would be great to get younger people coming across to some of our tenant working groups meetings and events, I think we kind of realise that sometimes that's not a very attractive proposition, and maybe there are more creative ways and different ways that we can involve younger people to make sure that their voices are heard.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Gina's also got her hand up, and basically what I was going to say was Gina obviously plays an instrumental role in terms of pulling all of those moving pieces together. and to echo Councillor Lloyd Selby's comment earlier, this is a tenant-led engagement strategy, and the value that we derive from it is from the hard work and encouragement, really, from Gina and her colleagues. Also those that give up their time. So members who attend this committee give up their time freely to improve the lot of their fellow tenants and residents. And I don't think that can be underestimated. On the point, and it's occurred to me from the earlier presentation, because I think a similar point was made around youth engagement. And opportunities for youth engagement. I think there's an opportunity for us to work with Tom and the team there, develop some sort of joint strategy around a common framework for how we engage with the youth as a council, that we can obviously use that as a means in various other areas of the council's business as well. So I think that's something, a piece of learning from today's committee for me, around how do we ensure that activity is cross council. Just a final point on that. For a number of years, we ran an annual event, and some members will have attended that either as residents, tenants, or members. We used to run an annual fun day, and we used to receive a lot of diverse feedback that perhaps the more traditional routes to engagement wouldn't have touched upon. And I think, Nick, it's just an area that when we're looking at the strategy next year, I think it's another area that we come back to, because that annual fun day that was usually held in the summer, the last event was at Gladstone Gardens. Hundreds, over 800 people, I think, attended that event. And it was a really useful way, in an informal environment, around engaging with our customers and our tenants and residents, to get a real feel for how they felt around the services. So going back to the point, I think we don't stand still. Our activity will be reflected in our new strategy, and hopefully, as I say, the work that our tenants are doing at the moment puts us in a much stronger position when we come to run the STAR survey later this year, and hopefully that will be reflected in those returns that we'll receive. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Mike, are you on about Festivale?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I am. Yes, I am. We stopped during COVID, and
I remember, yes.
yeah, we stopped that summer. The last one was the summer before, and it hasn't relaunched. And I think it's well worth us considering that with our residents groups and our residents panel, about how do we resurrect that, because that was a really exceptional. And I have to thank Heather Powney, who really was the driving force there, together with a couple of colleagues.
Yeah, it would be good to get that up and running again. I did go to it once or twice, and the amount of people I saw there, the diversity, it was quite impressive. It was very good to hear opinions from so many different people. So it would be good to get that up and running again. I would fully support that. Gina? Gina, would you like to come in?
Can you hear me?
Ah, there you are. Hello.
I know, I forgot.
It's all right, don't worry.
Yeah. I just want to add that regarding the working group, the tenants working group, when I started with them about 5 years ago, there was really quite a lot of old elderly people, mainly all over 60 to 80-year-olds. But I'm pleased to say, I'm chairman of this working group. I'm pleased to say that last Thursday we had a meeting, and I was pleased to see there was about 6 younger people that turned up, and that pleased us tremendously because we don't just want elderly people. Of course we want them, but we want youngsters as well. And I was pleased to think that a few people are turning up that are younger, because we want them to speak up and be able to say what they want. And I want you to be able to listen to them and hear what they want. And I mean, they're the future, not us oldies. But I'm still chairman and I'm still here because unfortunately, or fortunately for me, they keep on voting me in. So here I still am. But I enjoy it tremendously. I think it's a fabulous, fabulous thing to do. The Tenants Working Group is fabulous. I really enjoy it. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. From what I hear, you do a very good job. So you should be proud that they keep voting you in. Councillor Hennessy.
Hello, thank you, Chair. Hi, Nick. Thank you for the report. This will be really brief. As Julie knows, Julie and I started off as members of the working group. They are one of the hardest working members of the public. And with Gina's chairmanship, they do a brilliant job. They try their best to listen, to have all tenants' views. I was lucky enough to attend their Christmas do. And like Gina said, there are lots of new young members present there. They do their best. And I can't thank them enough for all the hard work they do. I'd just like to say that.
Thank you, Councillor Hennessy. Okay, does anybody else want to speak? Okay, there have been no real recommendations made. So let me just check this. Sorry, I've lost my page. Right, I've got it. So, committee happy to note the report. Councillor Hennessy?
I'm very happy to note it.
Okay, can I have a seconder? Councillor Hanks, I see your hand up. We can see you, Councillor.
Happy to second. Happy to second.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Nick. It is very good to hear the things that are going on. It's very encouraging, so thank you. The next item is homelessness rapid rehousing plan update. Is that you or Mike, Nick? Which one is it? It's you again. Hello.
Yeah, I'll have a stab. As soon as I clicked off, I thought I shouldn't have turned off my camera because I might be back. I've got a presentation for this one as well, just for the same reason, really, just to give a little bit of structure to what I will try and share with you this evening. So if you can click to the first slide, please. Okay, just as a reminder, again, just to begin with, really, the aim of the rapid rehousing plan was to minimise the use of temporary accommodation for homeless households, and the next part is a phrase that Welsh Government use quite a lot to ensure that homelessness or periods of homelessness are rare, brief, and not repeated. So that's the overall aim of what we're trying to do. So the next slide, please. By way of background, certain members of this committee would have been involved in a task and finish group in relation to homelessness several years ago. I can't exactly remember which year it was, but a really detailed piece of work looking at the context of homelessness, the law around homelessness, all aspects of homelessness, and a really helpful report was produced, which kind of acted as the spine, really, of our rapid rehousing plan. The plan itself was approved by Cabinet in 2023 and was discussed in quite a level of detail, really, at scrutiny around that time as well. And the plan, which is included within the papers, sets out the range of priority actions and interventions that we're going to take in order to ensure that homelessness is rare, brief and not repeated. So the next slide, please. Thank you, Mark or Liz, whoever's got a hold of the mouse. So where are we now in terms of temporary accommodation? And it's good news in so much that the situation has improved quite dramatically over the last 2 years. It's not great news, and we haven't cracked this. There are still people living in temporary accommodation, and over the longer term, clearly we would want to get to a position where that was not the case. However, as the figures in the table in front of you indicate, really, there's been quite a significant increase in the number of households in temporary accommodation, dropping from 340 down to 186 very recently. The use of bed and breakfast accommodation has dropped significantly as well. We acknowledge that bed and breakfast accommodation is probably the most inappropriate and the most expensive form of temporary accommodation. So really good to see a reduction in that. And lastly, families in temporary accommodation. So a real big drop in the number of families with dependent children in temporary accommodation. So that's really pleasing to see as well. So what's behind that? What's helped us get to this position? If we can move on to the next slide, it'll start to give us some of the key things really. And the big thing in terms of homelessness, the best way to prevent homelessness or to address homelessness, I guess, is to increase the supply of affordable housing. And we've made some really great progress over the last couple of years in this area. And just some sort of highlights really to remind ourselves here, really. The 53 new homes at Hazelwood Road, and I know many members have been down to the site and had a look at that. But a significant proportion of those properties were allocated to homeless people. We've purchased, the Royal We, really, one of our RSL partners has been able to purchase 28 new homes off the shelf. We call that from a developer with our support. So we've supported and prioritised that bid going into Welsh Government for Transitional Accommodation Capital Programme grant. So that was a 28 new homes fairly recently that were available. We've purchased properties out of St Athan from the MOD. We've increased the number of private rented sector accommodation units that we've got access to by forming relationships with new and existing private landlords to encourage them to expand portfolios and give us nomination rights to private rented sector properties. Prevention, homelessness prevention is always, prevention's better than cure. And where we've been able to focus our homelessness prevention work, we've been effective in preventing over 100 people from becoming homeless in the first place and not requiring temporary accommodation. So, in the longer term, that's the most cost-effective, best solution for everyone all around, really, if we can kind of resolve the problem at source and stop people coming into homelessness. Because when they do, if they're in temporary accommodation for a period of time and then having to move on, that has huge impacts on households. So prevention work has been really effective in helping us to get to where we are currently. And also the 80 units of accommodation at Hale Croeso out in Llantwit Major, providing temporary accommodation. So where families are needing to go into temporary accommodation, they're no longer, or they haven't been going into hotels and other forms of temporary accommodation. They've been going into high quality, self-contained, good accommodation. So that hopefully that experience of time in temporary accommodation is a lot better than it would have been otherwise. So really great to see some of those things coming to fruition. The next slide, please. So the action plan, or the transition plan, which is included in the report, again is very detailed and gives quite detailed descriptions of progress in relation to all of the actions. I'm not going to talk through all of that today, but just to pick out some of the key headings, really. Firstly, into what the council has been particularly effective over the last few years, actually, is securing additional funding to support the building of new homes. last year we were successful in getting another £7 million worth of slippage money. That's in addition to the £10 million budget allocation we had from Welsh Government for social housing grants. So £17 million in total, and extra slippage again this year to be able to fund new housing development. The social housing grant is in addition to transitional accommodation capital programme, which I just mentioned briefly a second ago. That's extra money to be able to purchase or acquire existing properties. And we've been successful in getting quite a lot of money back. I think it's £4 million this year for purchasing of existing homes. So the council itself has bought back a number of existing or homes which have previously sold under the right to buy arrangements. We've also purchased under TACP 2 HMOs which are formerly operated by a private landlord. They were going to be sold and potentially lost, so we've purchased those with a view to bringing those back into occupation and being able to help people occupy those. And we've also worked with RSLs, housing associations, to be able to buy back properties they would have sold in the past under the right to acquire arrangements, which are the equivalent of right to buy for housing associations. So the TACP, it's a bit easier to say TACP in the full title, has been really effective in terms of buying existing homes and increasing the supply of properties. And one of the other point I'd like to make it in this really is that we've been able to do this not just through sort of lobbying and building the case and highlighting the need, but also in terms of forward funding developments. So where we've identified a need for developments to get things off the ground, if additional slippage money becomes available elsewhere in Wales, which it is, because not all councils do this, where councils can't spend their money and Welsh Government got some extra money left over at the end of the year, they're able to come to the Vale because they know we've progressed schemes and we can spend that money. So we've been able to punch above our weight, if you like, in terms of getting that chunk of that grant or those grants in order to be able to build new homes, and we'll carry on doing that, of course, over the next years. I wanted to mention private sector leasing, and I think this was mentioned briefly under the budget report, really, where mention was made for Harvard Housing Association, who used to operate a leasing scheme, and then gave us notice that they wanted to cease that. We actually set up our own in-house leasing scheme to ensure that those properties were not lost to us, and we manage those ourselves now. So we were able to convince landlords to sign up with us rather than Harvard, protect those tenancies and those homes. So we've got about 20 units of that accommodation at the moment. There is negotiation underway on leasing with Welsh Government. Welsh Government operate the Wales leasing scheme across Wales. This is where long leases are taken from property owners, and then those properties are made available to people, to homeless people. So we're in negotiations about joining the Wales leasing scheme to give us some further opportunities to further increase the supply of accommodation, particularly for homeless people. So that's an area hopefully we can expand on and get access to some more homes. The next key area is relation to the housing allocations policy, sometimes referred to as Homes for You. And the emphasis here is ensuring that households in greatest need have access to social housing. Not easy when we've currently got just over 7,000 on the waiting list, and probably between us and the housing associations, about 500 properties becoming available each year. But we're constantly looking at that policy to make sure it's working in the right way. And we've got a proposal coming forward to Cabinet in the next month or so, looking at how we balance the need to provide accommodation to local people with fulfilling our obligations in respect to homelessness and helping the people in the greatest need, really. And that's ahead of some changes that we're expecting in terms of homeless legislation, where Welsh Government will require councils, not just us, to do that. So a bit of a sense check, really, to make sure that the homes are being allocated to the people in absolutely greatest need. Of course, it's not just housing and bricks and mortar and a roof over people's heads, which, although is very important, it's, I think, the an important aspect as well is the support that goes with that, or the support that people need in order to manage a tenancy and be able to live independently. We provide a huge amount of housing related support each year, packages of support to different groups of people, from people experiencing domestic abuse to people with mental health, alcohol, substance misuse issues, older people, younger people. A lot that support is funded from housing support grants, and is available and is prioritised and tied towards homeless people as well. We do that by way of drop-ins. We've run drop-ins at hotels, temporary accommodations. Obviously, we've got the one-stop shop in Houghton Road, but we ensure that people who are homeless or threatened with homelessness have priority and receive the support that they need to be able to take on a tenancy and be able to maintain that tenancy thereafter. This year, the council was lucky enough to have its HSG allocation increased. And we're working through what we would call a spend plan now, setting out what we're going to spend that money on. The majority of it enables us to protect and sustain the current services. It wasn't so long back we were looking potentially at having to cut some of our HSG services. We're not now. We're able to sustain what we've got and hopefully have a little bit left over to look at some growth and some opportunities to meet some gaps that we'll have identified via our housing needs assessments. So moving on to conversions and acquisitions, I mentioned this briefly in terms of buying properties. Members will be aware that we've purchased a number of properties. The Olive Lodge is a good example. I mentioned ex-council homes that we've bought, and those two houses of multiple occupation. So we're continuing to look at opportunities to acquire new properties, but also looking at the conversions. And we've got a pilot scheme of converting existing council homes into shared accommodation, because as the numbers we saw on one of the first slides, really, where we've been able to make inroads and reduce the number of families in temporary accommodation, the number of single people continues to be a concern, with large numbers of single people in temporary accommodation and spending a long time in temporary accommodation. So the current council's housing stock doesn't contain a huge amount of one-bedroom accommodation. So we're having to be creative and look at how we can increase the supply of shared accommodation to single people from the existing stock. So those pilots will come forward and provide some additional accommodation for single people. Prevention better than cure is a term I did use just a minute ago, and that remains to be the case with our rapid rehousing plan and our priorities going forward, where we're continuing to look at how we can prevent people, and that's sort of getting in early. Renting Homes Wales Act has extended the notice periods for tenants now, so we've got a longer period to work with people when or if they receive a notice. And some examples of this are negotiating with landlords if there are issues regarding arrears or damage to properties. We can help out in some instances with that, with discretionary payments, and also working with support providers to make sure that tenants, if they're struggling in a private tenancy, get the support they need to be able to manage that tenancy correctly. So a lot of work in relation to prevention. The one sort of caveat I'd mention in relation to prevention, because homeless figures are so high now, then the caseload for housing solutions officers is probably about 4 times the size it was prior to COVID. So the more people come to the door, the team is under pressure to be able to provide that early intervention, that prevention, that assistance that people need in order to maintain a tenancy. So just to put on people's radar, I guess, it continues to be a challenge. And last but not least, the work with private landlords. There are a number of private landlord partners who we work with and are able to expand their portfolio and are doing that. And we're working with those, but also looking to work with other landlords where we can, recognising that council housing and social rent is one tenure, but the private rented sector in the Vale remains significant and is a really important tenure for so many people. So it's sort of maintaining links with private landlords and making sure that they continue to operate and those homes continue to become available, although clearly there are challenges in that sector for those landlords. So next slide, please. I think that's in terms of future priorities, Mike had mentioned, I think, in relation to the hotel and the plans to vacate the hotel from the end of this financial year. We've used the hotel for 5 years, so it's really great to get to this position where we no longer need that, but we need to replace that with temporary accommodation of different sorts, so the shared accommodation, private rented, leased accommodation, etc. So we continue to build up that portfolio of properties that we can use as alternative temporary accommodation. Whilst we've been really, the next point is really important and relevant, I think, is because where we've been really successful in building lots of homes, the point remains that we need to continue to have this pipeline in place, because I think otherwise we get to a position where we build a new housing estate, house a lot of people, and the number of homeless people in temporary accommodation reduces significantly. And we think, oh, great, we're making good progress. But unless we continue to have these new homes in the pipeline coming on stream, what tends to happen is that those numbers would otherwise gradually increase back to where we started from. So it's just making the point that we need this programme in place. And I know the council itself is investing lots and lots of money in this. The RSL partners work closely with us, and we're in constant contact with Welsh Government as well in terms of grants and things that they can do to reduce barriers. So there are a number, which is really pleasing to see, a number of new schemes which are in that pipeline and hopefully due to come aboard. Some of these very soon, others a little bit further down the line, but it's about stacking up that pipeline always so that we don't go for too long where there are no new housing schemes due to come online. So yeah, that the other priorities, as I mentioned, are working with the RSLs so that they're able to help. So it's not just on us, the council, the housing associations definitely do their bit, which is really, really helpful. And also this where the continued pressure is going to come from really is single persons. So it's having accommodation and creative solutions available for single people who find it increasingly difficult to sort of access the property ladder, private rental accommodation, etc. So we're seeing lots and lots of applications for rehousing from single people. So I think that was my last slide. Yes, it was. So yeah, I probably pause there if that's okay, Chair, and field any questions from you.
Thank you very much, Nick. I can see we have a couple of people wanting to speak, but going back to what you're saying about that task and finish group, it was 2021.
Okay.
Myself, Councillor Aviott, Councillor Perks, Councillor Hanks and Councillor Cave were on it. I believe Heather Smith was on it as well. And Councillor Perks, I believe, was the chair of it. So there we go. It's a while back, but yeah, there we are.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm going to bring in Councillor Hennessy now.
Hiya, Nick. 3 quick questions. First one, how many people do we currently have at the Holiday Inn?
Mm-hmm.
And what is their average, their age makeup and everything? Second question, residents are supposed to have moved into the Colcott Clinic on the 16th of December. Have the issues now been fixed with that property? And the third question, the Olive is supposed to be opening in the end of March. As I pass it nearly every single day, when will it open and is it on budget?
Okay. The first question is probably something I can answer more easily. I think there was, at the end of last week, there was 23 people in the Hotel International. Their ages, there's a lot, there's younger people there, but what we are doing with the people who are remaining at the Holiday Inn is having a plan for each of those people really. So to where they're going to go to, what the alternative is. So staff in the Housing Solutions team are engaging with those remaining people to ensure that we've got a pathway laid out. Clearly, that pathway will depend on accommodation becoming available, and the Calcott Clinic was an element of that, as are the other schemes as well. So it's ideally that the accommodation will be available quite soon, but it could be quite tight for some of the developments really to get those complete and available for the people to move in. So that's why we would have to have a plan B in mind for some people if the original destination wasn't available to them. In terms of Calcott Clinic, Mike and the Olives, you might be better placed to say what the latest development are in that, because yeah, you're right, Councillor Hennessy, that isn't ready at the point in time, but there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to address the issues and make sure those units are available as soon as possible.
Mike?
Okay, come in, Chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of Calcott, last minute snagging, as there are with a number of schemes, and greatest plans don't always come to fruition. There's about a 3-week delay on the Calcott Clinic, councillor. It's just some last minute snagging issues which need to be resolved. It's not last minute snagging, as you're aware, and I drive past Olive Lodge and on a virtual daily basis, and so no, Olive Lodge is going to go past the original anticipated completion date. It's more likely to be towards the end of May. There's been a great amount of work done in the last week and a half, I've noticed there, and what you can't see is the additional construction at the back of the building, so all you can see is the front, and I saw the windows at the front had gone in this week as well. So things are moving at pace. In terms of budget, no, it's fixed budget. So as far as budget, we're on track with budget. It's just the timescales that have been challenging. Issues with regard to weather, issues with regard to supply of some materials. And as I say, there has been an awful lot of work going. So the new construction at the rear, which is very difficult, unless you're playing golf, is very difficult to see. That's almost complete. So you'll see, I'm sure we'll see a vast change in relation to the front elevation over the next couple of weeks. Can I just pick up on one of the points Nick has made in relation to supply? You approved or you considered the Housing Revenue Account business plan recently. There's about £1 billion worth of new build investment in that plan over the next 30 years. Members will be aware that we've entered into a development partnership with Cardiff City Council, and I'm able to confirm that the developer that tendered for the building work in Cardiff in the Vale has now been selected through a very robust tendering process, and Lovell Homes, who are exceptional builders in this area, particularly around social and affordable housing, I'm pleased to welcome on board on that partnership. Over the next 10 years, we're due to deliver somewhere in the region of around 500 new homes in the Vale. And as part of that process, we're continuing at the moment to have negotiations on some new build sites, which currently aren't in our portfolio, but hopefully in the next 6 to 8 weeks, we can get to a negotiated position to improve our land supply, which is going to be part of the barrier going forward in terms of that pace and scale. On a final point, we were very, very pleased as a council, and I presume Councillor Perks will mention, we were very pleased to welcome the Cabinet Minister from Welsh Government for Housing a couple of weeks ago, who we showed around some of our existing sites and our new sites coming forward that Nick has mentioned. I think it's fair to say she was absolutely blown away with the quality of the homes we're building and the type of properties that we're providing for tenants in the Vale of Glamorgan. It was a really worthwhile visit, and I think, as Nick has mentioned, I think we hold quite a good, in terms of Welsh Government and their housing division, I think we're well thought of as a local authority in being able to deliver what we say. And it's very welcome that that slippage that other councils haven't been able to spend is coming our way. We can't sit on our laurels. I think Nick has mentioned 7,000 currently on the waiting list. Significant proportion of people at the moment who are homeless and are being rehoused through that temporary accommodation. And if I digress just a little with an analogy, we can't continue building or buying ambulances to hold our residents in whilst they're waiting for permanent accommodation. So that pipeline that Nick has mentioned is hugely crucial to ensure that we don't fall back into a position that we've had to endure for the last number of years, is spending on a large amount of money on unsuitable temporary accommodation. And of course, we don't want people in temporary accommodation for long periods of time either. So yeah, it's a reflection really on the hard work of the team, on our development colleagues who have been working and building the new homes, our homelessness team who are working with, and one of the things that I've noticed in nearly a 30-year career in housing, the complexity and the vulnerability of a lot of the clients that are coming to us now. I know members have contacted me directly and through the team. There are extremely complex cases. And just one final point, the point that Nick made around it's not just bricks and mortar. We have contracted services in the Vale of Glamorgan, £5.7 million last year we spent on contracted housing support services. And we are aware that the Minister has been able to secure additional funding in their draft budget. I predicate that with it's a draft budget and clearly has to go through Welsh Government and be approved and voted for. But an additional £21 million has been identified in those budget proposals to support that housing related support. I can't thank the work that colleagues at Pobble do at the moment in relation to the triage service, the one-stop shop service in Houghton Road, and clearly the other providers that we commission that provide all of that dedicated support to sustain people in tenancies and that independent living. So it's really, it is a good news story against a backdrop of significant homelessness pressures, and we haven't resolved the homelessness crisis in the Vale.
Thank you both for your answers.
Thank you. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Thanks, Chair. Before I just ask my quick question, I just want to place on record my thanks to having, as Mike's just referenced now, increasingly complex cases around homelessness and around housing. I sort of commend the team and all their efforts in what they're doing and their sincere approach. And I just, on that point, I just wanted to say that this report just highlights one thing for me, and that is you're not working in isolation, and that you're tackling these issues not just as a single sort of homelessness issue. It's about sort of that longevity of sort of someone maintaining that independent living and them securing dignity in life as well, which has really been sort of interesting to learn. So again, Nick, thanks very much for sort of alluding to that and the work that you do with colleagues across the council and wider. My only quick question was on the property acquisition policy, and could you just remind us in terms of a timeline of when we can expect that update? And I assume that it'll sort of come to this committee for us to sort of have a look at. Thanks.
We've already got a property acquisition policy there to be able to go and buy properties, and we have been doing that for some time now with the formal right to buys. Mike might have to sort of bail me out really if that policy is expired or there was any intention to bring that back. I thought that there was sufficient scope within that to keep doing that, and as was recognising this point, I suppose, in terms of the pipeline, because we wouldn't want to stop acquiring properties and working on properties for a period of time, because that could set us back a long time then in terms of that pipeline. But Mike, sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, so the housing acquisition policy is being reviewed and revisited. There's a recommendation that members on this committee put forward and was approved in relation to the consultation with ward members where acquisition was affected in their ward areas. That's being added to the new policy. It should be with you. We've been working really hard on the development partnership side. So Andrew Freegard, our development manager, has been working really hard on that. I would suspect that, again, we will get that new policy to you for your consideration, again, prior to summer recess. So probably around June, July.
Thank you. Councillor Perks.
Is it okay for me to speak before the other members? Is that okay?
So I was getting myself confused then. Yes, sorry. Yes. I forgot you're no longer on this committee, are you?
No, I just like
caught in a time warp then.
I just like to turn up at every meeting, that's all.
I got caught in a time warp.
Yeah, I know. I'll wait.
Councillor Hanks.
Thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to say a big thank you. It's a huge and impressive amount of work that's been done by the housing department, but all departments seem to have linked up well and worked well together, you know, whether it's rapid rehousing, the private rentals, homelessness, purchase of land. I think you're doing an absolutely amazing job. And your aim to rehouse or relocate all existing placements before the end of this financial year is indeed a huge achievement. So thank you.
Councillor Aviots.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering what the council can do to counteract all the gossip and the rumours that every time we build anything new, they're all going to be, all the tenants are going to be, how can I say, undesirables. What can we do as councillors to try and dispel that myth? And also, if Comms put out something, oh look, we built this new block of flats or whatever, could we say this is to house our people? Can they word it in a way that that we can kind of counteract this gossip and rumours? Because I've heard a lot about the Colquitt Clinic, and it's quite bad. It's quite vicious, the gossip that's going around. Thank you.
Yeah, there's been a stigma, isn't there, around social housing tenants and council tenants for many years, really, and that's really regrettable, and it's a false representation, of course, as we all know. I think what we can say in relation to the allocations policy and homelessness, but when housing is in scarce supply, the policy is set up so that the most vulnerable and the people in the greatest need have access to that accommodation. But it's clearly a big misconception by people to think that because somebody's in great need, they're somehow undesirable. We've seen the new housing developments at Hazelwood Road, at Subway Road. There's lots of family accommodation, single persons accommodation. There's lots of good shared examples. So where people, really vulnerable people, have moved in, high numbers of vulnerable people sometimes, and there haven't been the issues that sometimes people would predict or scaremonger. So I think we would want to sort of draw on that track record. When people move in, clearly especially when there's larger numbers of people moving in all at one point in time, there needs to be intensive management support available so that people can sort out their own tenancies and get themselves up and running, but also blend with other neighbours and nip any issues in the bud, etc. So we'll be doing the same for the new housing developments and making sure that people are not set up to fail. Support is there, and also if people are breaking any rules or doing something that we're not happy about, that we clamp down on that very, very quickly as well. So the stigma has been around for many, many years. whether we can improve communications and keep making the case for that. Whether that will address or resolve that, I'm not quite sure. But we'll do what we can, and hopefully, around new developments, when people move in, they'll see that that the neighbours are just like themselves, and people trying to make the best of a situation, same worries, same challenges as everyone else, and they're not people with three heads or anything else. So hopefully that package of support and sort of intense housing management will make sure that that move-in process goes smoothly.
Thank you. Are committee happy for me to bring in Councillor Perks? Councillor Perks, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. And yes, just going back to the task and finish group that we were involved in, I think that was a really rewarding topic that we chose, and and the support that we had from Welsh Government to our own housing officers to the planning team, everything that we asked for, we got the information that we needed, and it was really helpful in us being able to produce the report that we did. That's obviously moving things forward. But basically, really, what I want to speak about tonight is just for me as cabinet member to put on record how sort of proud I am, and the sterling work that's been undertaken by the housing team over this last year. It's no mean feat. The number of houses that we've got built, the development, from the development team, finding where we're going to build to the other team sort of ensuring that the people who need it most get into those properties, to the massive work undertaken to ensure that the number within the hotels has been reduced, so that at the end of this financial year, we're no longer spending money on hotels. We can spend that somewhere else. It's absolutely amazing. And I think, obviously, I have said, I think they recognise, the members on the committee recognise the hard work that's been undertaken by this housing team. If we look at the housing revenue account that we talked about before, and what the development plans are for the future, and what we're doing with the properties that we have already under the Welsh Housing Quality Standards, and what we need to do with them to bring them up to standard. And yes, Mike's right. We did have the cabinet minister a couple of weeks ago, and some other people came with her as well. And I think they were absolutely blown away, Mike's right, by the quality of housing that we're actually building. And I know a couple of councillors from here have managed to go and have a look at some of the developments that we're building. And I offer that again, if anybody wants to come and have a look at any of the developments that we're building before tenants move in, the offer is there, because I like to go and have a look at them. I like to see where our tenants are going to be living, and it's high quality, future-proofed housing that they live in, and buying back houses and stuff like that, and putting those into multiple houses, multiple occupation. Brilliant idea, for those houses. And also just to say, what we have done in Lantwick Major, and the modern methods of construction that we talked about on the task and finish group, what we have actually got down there is such high quality temporary accommodation that anybody would want to live in. And we've got our Ukrainian families there, but we've also got residents from the Vale of Glamorgan who through no fault of their own have found themselves homeless, and that to have families out of the hotel is absolutely excellent, because I think we weren't in that position. It'd been a long time. It was only recently that we had houses back in the houses. Families back in the hotel. We'd managed to, ensure that families who were in temporary accommodation, not in the hotel. And it was only through the numbers of people that we had that unfortunately they had to be in the hotels. But now we've managed to, sort of reverse that, and people are actually got their own front door, got their own cooking space and things like that. And that, what you'd expect that anybody in temporary accommodation. So, the partners that we work with, I have to mention those as well. Mike's mentioned Pobble, but there's so many, the SLAs that we work with who also provide high quality housing as well. So, yep, I just can't wait for the next year now and what we're going to produce next year, and hopefully bring the numbers down. But yes, thank you very much for the housing team. They're fantastic.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Perks. Does anybody else want to speak? Councillor Lloyd Selby.
Really brief comment. I met somebody who I know this week who, through no fault of their own, was made homeless and accommodated in Holiday Inn, and they've just been moved into their own flat. And they said, Susan, my life has started again. And their head was held high. And, you know, we rightly scrutinise the money and we rightly scrutinise the figures in this committee. I just think it's really important to remember that there's ordinary people like us who are behind this, who find themselves, as Councillor Perks has already said, can sometimes find themselves in challenging circumstances. And, you know, I for one, am delighted that this council is continuing to prioritise people who find themselves in that situation. So thanks to everybody who's worked so hard, because you're changing people's lives. Well done.
Thank you. If we have no other comments or questions or recommendations, I will go to the recommendations. Do we have anybody else wanting to speak first? No hands. Okay, so the recommendation is basically for us to note this report. The committee happy for this to be done? Councillor Hennessy?
Yes, happy.
Councillor Hanks?
Happy to second.
Thank you very much. Nick, thank you very much for all the work your team do. It is much needed. We have had unprecedented levels of homelessness recently, and it has been a real strain on the whole country, not just this council, councils all over the UK. And it's good to know we're finally getting somewhere with housing people now. Thank you. Agenda, well, the next lot is any important items that are urgent under part 1. I have none. There are no urgent items under part 2 either. So that concludes our business this evening, and all I have to do is remind you that the next meeting is Wednesday the 5th of March, 6 p.m. Thank you all for coming along tonight. Go and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you. Bye.
Good night.
Bye.